Hello, friends. It's Arlene Smith, Healing the Hearts of Healthcare. And today's topic is all about treating and spotting compassion fatigue in yourself. So I'd like to start our story today, our podcast off with the story of when I first went into nursing. My first position was working in a step-down trauma unit, and I loved this experience. It was a great opportunity to me to learn as a new graduate from some really good preceptors. And I remember it like it was yesterday because there was a patient that I took care of during the course of my time as a brand new nurse coming into the field, and his name was Michael. And Michael was an 18-year-old boy who happened to get into a car accident and was not wearing his seatbelt. And he sustained an injury to his frontal temporal lobe. And so for those of you that may or may not know, that frontal temporal lobe and injuries that are sustained there, it can cause a person to be impulsive, to lose this sense and their ability to be able to remember and recall and manage their own emotional state. And I remember this like it was yesterday because I worked the night shift from 7p to 7a. And very often while we were providing Michael his care, he would spend his night all night long at the nurse's station calling out. He was confused. He was agitated. He was frustrated. And I remember asking one of the nurses, how do you manage this day in and day out? And she said, you have to be able to look at your patients with this idea that your purpose here is to provide healing and to provide love. And when you look at it from that lens of empathy and compassion, you can really work from a place where you see that person in a specific need. Now, for Michael, it was very different because it was repetitive and it was day in and day out. And it's very easy as caregivers to slip into a place where we become compassionate fatigue, where we are exhausted. And we always, as healthcare workers, need more education around how to spot it in ourselves so we can bridge these gaps and make sure that if we find ourselves in these situations with compassion fatigue, that we've got a plan in place to be able to address it. So very simply, a lot of times people ask me, well, what is compassion fatigue, let alone how do you spot it? Well, it's a condition that you experience because you're exposed to those emotional and psychological stressors over an extended period of time, right? And when we think about COVID and we think about all of the work that we did as healthcare workers during that period, it's very easy to see how many of us were functioning from that place of being fatigued in providing compassionate care. And maybe it was just that we were judging a little bit more when a resident or a patient had a specific request because we were so busy and we had to get so many things accomplished. But we have to question ourselves as to why understanding compassion and fatigue and why that's important. As healthcare workers, we are healers. We're put here on this earth to do a very specific job, and that is to provide care to those who need it. We have to heal the hearts and bodies and minds of those people that we provide care to. And sometimes as a healthcare worker, it's our ability to just self-identify that's what's lacking. We're not even able to address it because we're not even identifying that it's an issue with ourselves. So how do we get to this place where we recognize that we're operating with a decreased level, maybe in empathy, or maybe that we're emotionally exhausted, or maybe we're having sort of this sense of what I like to call a detachment from the patients that we serve. We're kind of looking at them from a different lens. Well, I will tell you, it happens all the time in the field. So how do you spot it? How do you actually spot that you're stuck in that space where you're experiencing compassion fatigue? Well, number one, you will always hear me say over and over again, we have to get better at becoming expert noticers when we're working in the healthcare industry. That means that we're paying attention to what's happening in ourselves and around us. See, there are some cardinal signs that we see in the research that point to the direction of we are at a place where we might be operating, and we might be operating from that place of we are exhausted. And it's really difficult to provide compassion in a way that it doesn't lead to apathy or us feeling exhausted. So what are some of those signs? Well, number one, it's that emotional exhaustion, right? It's some simple signs that you might see in yourself. You might experience chronic fatigue. You might notice that you're drained. You might be feeling overwhelmed. And you might even notice that you're a little bit more irritable than you normally are. And I'm going to challenge you to be kind to yourself when you notice these triggers and these areas of focus in yourself. Because the goal is to get yourself to a place where you are connecting passion to purpose, where you are able to provide care in a way that it makes you feel good, that it fills your heart up, and it fills up the heart of those people that you're providing care to. Number two is, be mindful that very often sometimes we can very quickly operate in this place where I like to call it as an empathy nosedive. It's like, we're going right down. Our plane is going down. And we have to think about this because it really is where apathy sets in. We have sort of this inability to connect with our patients on an emotional level. We're sort of checked out, or as I like to say, sometimes we become emotionally numb. We're just going through the motions of providing care. That's a sign that you might be working under compassion fatigue. The third sign is negativity. And you know the power of negativity. Listen, I am a huge believer that in our healthcare system, we have to all work really hard to make a conscious effort to make sure negativity doesn't creep in. And if you haven't noticed, you just look at our world around us. We are all surrounded by negativity. So it's a concerted effort that we have to do. But it's really our ability in ourselves to look inward and identify and self-identify. Are we a little bit more cynical in nature? Are we pessimistic? Are we really looking at things from that lens of everything is going wrong? Because I trust you, if that's the lens you're looking at, don't be surprised if the universe is sending you everything that's going wrong. We have to be cognizant of that. And remember, you're a healer, so your energy is going to transfer to other people. So if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling like you don't care, well, then how will your patients feel? They will feel the same way, and it absolutely will affect their health. And I want you to think about those instances where you might be finding that disconnect and think about how you can connect that passion to purpose. And the easiest way is to go straight towards just human connection, right? And asking questions and all in curiosity and showing people that you're actually interested in how they're doing, how they're adjusting, how they're adapting. It's an easy way to do that. The other thing that you might notice in yourself, it's actually the fourth one, is you might notice in yourself that you're seeing just over time this decrease in productivity. Listen, everybody has a rough day, right, where they're not giving it their 100%. I'm not talking about that because that's the occasional day where it's just hard for me to sort of shift into gears and give it my all. I'm talking about days and days and days where you get into this state where you're struggling to concentrate, where you're noticing in yourself that you're making mistakes, or you're not as efficient or effective as possible. I mean, that leads you down a pathway of being not motivated and not fully engaged in the work that you do. And as healthcare workers, we have to be mindful of this tendency because it's a true opportunity to be a source of healing for people. And we must think about how we do that so that we're always reflecting and looking inward and thinking, how do we actually make this the best type of care, that it's delivered in a way that makes people feel safe emotionally and physically, and that they're receiving a care in the manner in which they deserve it. And so we have to think about that. Because so many times we go through the motions and we're not even realizing that we're doing that. And sometimes I see with just one of these cardinal signs that I see that people are walking around with is this idea that they find themselves in situations where they are outwardly showing sort of these what I like to call avoidance behaviors. And this is this is maybe an individual that's avoiding a certain patient or maybe to do certain tasks because they're associating either that patient or that task with a feeling of emotional distress. It happens. And even sometimes people withdraw inward, and you could see it in them. And so we have to think about that. I know for me, it happened to me 100% during the pandemic. I found myself as a need of protection to draw inward and to withdraw and to really spend more time in quiet reflection instead of being out in the world and talking to people and being engaged. I didn't feel like I could do that. And I think it's okay to admit that when you see yourself falling into these traps. And I will also tell you that sometimes with compassion fatigue, we see it manifested with just a whole lot of physical symptoms, right? People have headaches and GI issues. You're noticing a weakened immune system. You might be getting sick more frequently and more often. Sometimes people even notice, not just with these physical changes, a change in their personality and in their behaviors, right? They might become more irritable or more impatient, or they might just notice that they are emotionally unstable themselves. Like anything can set them off. So what do you do if you find yourself in this situation? Listen, I'm always reminded of the flight attendant, on a flight when you get on the flight and they are there at the front reminding you to put that mask on yourself first. And I want to remind you why that's done. It's because you're no good to anybody else unless you take care of yourself. So we must really explore self-care in ourselves, and we have to look at how we do that. And I'm going to remind you that for healthcare workers, it can be incredibly challenging. Sometimes self-care just means you need to get adequate sleep and rest. Let's be honest. For many people, we're going shift to shift to shift, and we're exhausted, right? And we're not getting the great sleep that we need. Sometimes it's really looking at our diet and is it balanced? Listen, I am a huge proponent of looking at this because I know in myself, just in settings, I often did this, right? I didn't plan a meal properly, or I didn't eat during my shift during a 12-hour period, and I would come home and consume a whole lot of calories. We have to look at how we do that. It might be through healthy snacks and integrating that in and taking those breaks and making sure that we're finding those opportunities to do that. For some of you, it might just be like exploring those things that bring you joy. Is it an activity? Is it a hobby? And if you're struggling with this to think like, I can't fit this in, I'm going to tell you everybody can find 15 minutes to do something that gives them some type of pleasure or joy. Whether it's relaxing, whether it's reading a book, whether it's finding time to just sit in quiet reflection, we all have the ability to do that. So every day you have to make this part of your practice. And I will tell you, I feel like sometimes as healthcare workers, we feel the stress of, providing that care. And when we leave those shifts, we're thinking to ourselves, I could just use like a whole entire weekend off where I do nothing and I'm just not thinking of anything. Sometimes that can be dangerous too. And we have to try to narrow the focus down. We have to find those moments where we can find rest and recovery. And I love it. In the very first podcast when I talked about Wayne Mueller's work in the book Sabbath, Finding Rest and Relaxation, right, in the busyness of our lives, I love how in the book he reminds us, if you don't have a day to do it, incorporate throughout your day those moments where you're getting quiet, still, silent reflection, where it's giving you a minute to really just look at things from a different lens. And you will always hear me say and promote that we've got to do better as healthcare workers, really integrating mindfulness into our daily practice. And I have to say, as a nurse educator, one of the things that gives me great excitement is when I'm seeing this integrated more into communities and healthcare centers around the world. I mean, I think people are really seeing that this is making a difference, right? Taking that time out to allow us as healthcare workers to really just focus on our breathing, concentrating, and just allowing ourselves to be in a space of quiet, still silence gives us that opportunity to really get in a state where we can start beginning this journey of healing. And I love the idea of tapping into the things that put you in that natural state of flow where creativity comes out and you start to begin to explore things, because that is an incredible opportunity. And don't forget the power of journaling and writing your words down. I think sometimes as healthcare workers, we carry tremendous burden. I think of all of the experiences I've had as a nurse through the course of my career. Many of those experiences will often replay in my mind over and over again like a movie. And boy, do I wish sometimes I could just cut out those versions of those stories, because I would really only want to replay those things that give me joy and happiness. But that's not the world that we live in as healers and healthcare workers. We're exposed to a lot of things that can be very distressing to us. And it could cause us very easily to slip into this place where we don't even realize that we're experiencing compassion fatigue. And so one of the ways that we can do that, again, is that mindful meditation. I will remind you, as Veronica Barber pointed out in one of our earlier podcasts, the great work that is being done in research when it comes to neuroscience, which is we have this ability to create new neural pathways if we hold on to some of those experiences and look at them from a different lens. So whether that's those experiences that give you joy and happiness, you allow yourself to experience those. And the research shows if we do that for at least 10 seconds, it will create that sort of new neural pathways. And why do we want to do that? Because as much as we want to do great work, we have to realize that our minds are wired towards the negativity and negativity biases. And so we have to do our part to make sure that we're rewiring our brains and bringing in sort of those opportunities that we're looking at things from a different lens, a lens of positivity. And so if you ever get stuck and you're thinking, I'm not sure if I can do that, again, I'm going to remind you, you have to look at it almost as if it's like the nose on your face, right? You don't forget you have a nose. You know you have a nose, right? And you're looking at it every single day. And that's almost how you have to treat it, is I'm going to look at this as an opportunity that I can do every single day. And I'm going to remind you, you are in the best position to know you. You've been living you your entire life. That means that only you know the things that are going to be the best for you. So that means you might be that type of person where you are go, 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 go. And so the idea of rest and relaxation to get you out of this compassion fatigue, that is terrifying to you. You'd rather just flip and do different things, and that's completely fine. But if you're that person and you recognize that you need to slow your pace, that you need to build in some time throughout the day to find that quiet reflection, then that's what you should do as well. Listen, don't be ashamed to look deeply into those things that will give you joy, those experiences that you know are within you that are going to bring you joy, whether that's film or music or art or animals or anime. It doesn't matter what it is. It's what gives you joy. And those are the things that when you leave work, you really want to hold on to and use it as an escape. And don't forget the power of vacations and taking breaks. And I know what you're thinking. I don't have time to take vacations, nor do I have the money to take vacations. And I'm going to remind you that their staycations are just as effective. It comes down to planning and then making that intention of how you're going to spend your time. So if you like the outdoors, it might be on your day off saying, I'm going to commit to spending 2 hours in nature, doing a walk, using that time to reflect, to be able to think about the work that I do and to clear my head. Maybe that's what it is. We want to believe that everything has to be so grand, and it can be really difficult because in the world that we live in with social media, everything looks better than what we're experiencing when we look at it from the lens of other people, right? We can't help but notice. I might want to think that my staycation is fabulous, but my friend is on a trip to Paris for a week, and I can't allow myself to enjoy the experience of that vacation because I'm looking at it from a lens of why doesn't that happen to me, or why can't I have that? And I'm going to remind you that in it of itself is going to put you in a place where you're not going to feel joyful. And it's okay to be able to experience things from your perspective and to have joy about it and to appreciate it. And to be thankful that you have that opportunity. And I know sometimes with people tend to struggle with this. I get it. I'm going to remind you, the best experiences in my life that taught me this was providing direct care to people that were in very serious, life-threatening situations. Listen, I just live in a world where I believe if somebody isn't like praying over me and there are tubes coming out of me, it's a good day, right? Everything could be good that day. It's how we have to look at it. And as healthcare workers, you know that your health is precious, your patient's health is precious, and that you cannot determine the time that we spend on this earth. So use it wisely and make sure you're building in those breaks and taking out that time to rejuvenate your spirit. Because whether it's 15 minutes of just sitting in your car before you race off into your house because you've got a whole family to feed, or you have a house full of roommates and you're young, it doesn't really matter. Just build in that time to give it to yourself, that quiet reflection. And whether that's sitting on a bench, out in nature, and feeling how great it is to be alive and just allowing those thoughts to kind of enter into your mind. It's an easy way to slip out of that compassion fatigue. And again, we have to do this because we're caregivers and we are designed to be able to operate and provide compassionate care. And that comes from having empathy for other people. We actually want to take action and do something about it. We want to actually release that person's pain and suffering because it makes us feel good inside. It taps into who we are. It's part of our DNA. And I'm going to remind you that the work that we do, if you look at it from its core, it is all about a demonstration of love. That's right. It's all love. You are showing love for another person when you are pushing through, when you are allowing yourself to be that healer to an individual. And I know how hard that can be. Because people are people and they come from all different backgrounds. And it's really hard to show empathy and compassion to that person that is nudging you and making you feel like, oh, I just can't do it. I'm going to remind you, when you have those feelings and they surface up in your heart, that's your opportunity to look at it from a different lens. That is your opportunity to look at it and say, wait, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to remember why I went into this field. I went into this field to provide care, and that care is to be delivered to people regardless of who they are, what they look like, and how they approach this world. Because I'm going to remind you, people have gotten really good at disguising their pain and suffering, and it comes outward in this emotional response pretty much everywhere we go. So it's an opportunity for you as a healthcare worker to lead by example, to show the rest of the world how this can be done. And I want to challenge you to think and use your imagination and creativity. How could this transform healthcare if every single person worked every single day at developing these skills that they looked at the world from this lens, it would be a game changer. And people would experience healing significantly faster, because that energy that's dispersed between us as human beings would all be directed with love and healing and compassion and just this sense of empathy and caring, instead of frustration and being annoyed and agitated and angry. And remember, our emotions build on one another. So we have to be mindful of that. We have to be aware. So it's a call for you as a healthcare worker to really look inward and to look at self-compassion. And how do you actually do that? Well, I'm going to tell you, you have to treat yourself, number one, with kindness, understanding, and honestly, you have to look at yourself from a lens of you deserve this care. And I know what you're thinking. That's really hard to do, but you do deserve to have self-compassion. The work that you're doing every day is challenging. It's full of a lot of pain and suffering that you're experiencing firsthand. And so you need to avoid finding yourself in that place where you're judging yourself or you're blaming yourself for the way you're feeling, or you're blaming and judging other people that you work with as the reason why you can't provide compassionate care. So I'm going to tell you to look inward, and I'm going to remind you, always think about the reasons why you entered the field. You're a healer. You were designed for that. And it's incredibly important to remind yourself. And I'm a big believer in mantras. I think mantras are a great way to sort of reconnect the wiring in our brains to remind us as why we're doing this great work. So even if just every single day, even if you don't have time in your day to practice relaxation or to find those times of self-care, and believe me, I totally understand. You know, when I look at my journal, I think of all the times I worked those 16-hour shifts, and with commuting and getting, maybe I got 6 hours of sleep, right? So I get it. There's not always going to be those opportunities, but maybe it's just that you have a daily mantra that you repeat over and over in your head before you go into work and on your drive home. And maybe that just is very simple. I am full of love. I am full of joy. I am full of life. I am full of healing. I am full of spirit, and I am doing great work. I am healing others. And so maybe that's what you do every single day. But I'm going to remind you that we have to be on guard for these opportunities where we start seeing that we're slipping down that pathway of compassion fatigue. Because if we don't sort of change the direction overnight and sort of reconnect back our passion to purpose and remind ourselves and rewire our brains and say to ourselves, we're doing great work, everything's going to be okay, we're going to get through this day, you're going to find yourself slipping down a pathway where you will very quickly be doubting whether or not you're in the right field. And I'm going to remind you, you are in the right field. You are doing what you were designed to do, heal other people. So in this journey, it's about you learning how to heal yourself as you become that extraordinary healer. Listen, we all need healing, and that is the truth. So it's an opportunity every single day to do the great work that we do. So I hope that you enjoyed this podcast on managing that compassion fatigue. And I hope that you join me on a future podcast. And if you don't hear it enough, I just want to say thank you for all you do every single day. Again, the work that you do is soul-filling, purposeful work that has meaning. You are changing the lives of the patients and the residents that you care for. That is extraordinary, and not everybody can do it. So you have to celebrate that you are doing it, and you're doing it well. And tomorrow you'll do it better. Join me for the next podcast, and thank you, everyone, for what you do every day. Goodbye.